using technology to help with infection control. I'm Tonya Hall, and joining me is Tim Panagos, co-founder and chief technology officer at Microshare.io. Welcome, Tim.
Hi, Tonya.
So explain to us, what does Microshare.io do?
Microshare is about providing data for people who manage spaces, right? So we're talking about facilities, which can be buildings and hospitals or airports or military bases. We use information from IoT devices to bring that together to help them drive their businesses.
You specialize in using technology to help with infection control. Would you say this task starts off maybe as a hardware challenge or a data science challenge?
Yeah, in fact, it's a perfect example of a blend of all those things, right? It's how do we best use hardware and the environments that are easy to procure in a way that allows the data to be high enough quality that data science can make sense of it, right? So it's really not a story of one half, it's a story about putting those two things together in a way that make it good enough to solve the problem today. And that's, I think, a really important part of dealing with a crisis, is you can't always optimize both halves because you don't really have the time to invent new hardware, and you won't necessarily have time to do perfect data science. So it's really about figuring out what can you bring to the table that makes a material change in people's well-being.
What devices form the hardware foundation for data gathering?
So I think it's been highly publicized with people using smartphones, which is typically a Bluetooth orientation. And Bluetooth is nice because it's inexpensive, it's ubiquitous, it's a well understood technology. So we are really taking advantage of Bluetooth devices that come off the shelf typically, which means we can source them 1,000 at a time without really stressing the supply chain. And what we've decided really to do is focus on that commodity hardware and tweak the firmware to really make it better able to perform the specific job of managing contact tracing.
Do machine learning and artificial intelligence have a role on the data side?
They do. The first task, I think, is to get the data in the right shape for high quality analytics to be applied. And people usually start with visualization and sort of simple tools to get their job done. Good example of that would be if I have a coworker who is tested positive, then how to identify the people that they have had contact with over, let's say, 2 or 3 week period. That's fairly simple from the data perspective once it's available. But a better example around where machine learning comes into play is, what if I've contacted 1,000 people and I have only the ability to send a certain number home economically, maybe a limited number of tests? Where should I focus my remediation efforts? So using machine learning to produce scores that allows us to ultimately highlight those people that are at highest risk due to those contacts, so that we can really focus in the response to be appropriate. So that's a great use case for machine learning in this particular case.
How do you manage privacy in this data-rich environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. The extant sort of tools that we've heard publicized have been based on smartphone. One of the simple ways is to address it at the hardware level. If we're using your smartphone, obviously you're going to take that home with you. You're going to use it in your normal social interactions. It's really hard to kind of limit its use just to the work environment. So step one, I think, is our choice really for universal contact tracing has not relied on smartphone use, but to provide a secondary Bluetooth enabled device that you can leave at work, put in your desk and walk away, and know that at least your personal interactions after work are not going to be monitored. So that's, I think, step one, fairly low hanging fruit for privacy. Step two is something much more radical, where we think the solution ultimately to allowing employers to be data driven, to improve human well-being, but at the same time respect individuals' rights and privacy, is ultimately to do radical transparency, right? So making it very clear what data is being collected about you, what data is not being collected about you, and what's being done with it. And ultimately, I think it's about putting people at ease that their data is not being mistreated and is really going to being focused on helping to address their well-being and economic productivity. And so we think that's really the longer term and deeper strategy for managing that.
How do you build the AI data sets? Is there a commonality between use cases, or do you need data sets tuned for specific use cases?
Yeah, so it's tricky, right? So one of the key problems that we face is a lot of ML is really good if you have a long history of data, and most importantly, you have to have a training set that you believe. So not having a lot of data, because this is a new phenomenon, it's really tough to train models that can be, truly predictive about this particular moment in time, right? So what does COVID-19 predict? And particularly, it's really hard to say if you've got an epidemiological model, for instance, without many years worth of really highly clean data, what's your training set in those cases? So what we've actually been falling back on is AI from the previous decade, which is really rules-based expert systems, combined with some of these machine learning tools that really allow us to inject into the systems sort of the best human knowledge, or our human intuitions or guesses based on the academic research and the evolving experience of people in the field, to automate that, put it into the rules-based systems to make decisions. And then as we collect better data, to use that data then to refine and improve those human experiences using machine learning. As we look back on this, maybe 5 years from now, we'll have enough data, high quality data, with good training sets that also know the outcomes, that we'll be able to do something in hindsight perhaps and maybe help us for the next epidemic. But really it's kind of, what do we do in the interim, absent of really high quality volume data?
Then, speaking of that, what role do you see for this solution in the time beyond COVID?
Well, I think one of the things that is, I think the public's eyes will be open that now global pandemics are a thing, that it's a potential that will reoccur. And so preparedness, I think, will become part of the focus, and the tools and techniques that we put in place, whether technological or whether they're process-wise, I think will carry on, because people will want to know that if it does happen again, we won't be caught flat-footed the way we were this time. So I do think that we're going to be learning about new ways of doing business, new ways of going to work, new ways of going to school. And I think that will transcend the current moment. And I think what I'm really hoping for is that people who have to adopt contact tracing just as a way to get back to work will realize that having data that supports their decision making is a really powerful thing. And that ultimately that education should transcend this current moment into needing and wanting and desiring and understand how to work with data in their daily sort of routine work life to make things more efficient, to improve well-being just in general.
Tim Panagos, Chief Technology Officer at Microshare.io. If somebody wants to connect with you, Tim, maybe they want to find out more about the work that you guys do, how can they do that?
Yeah, so you can find us on the web at microshare.io. And if you want to connect with me on Twitter, I'm at microshare_CTO.
And find more of my interviews right here or at tonyahall.net. Thanks for watching.